The iron gate groaned as the heavy rain hammered against the cypress doors, a sound like fingernails scratching against bone. The house sat atop a cliff of rusted slate, overlooking a marsh where the water turned black with algae and the silence was thick enough to drown a bell. It stood in total isolation, a monolithic spike of stone and timber far removed from the civilizations of men. Inside, the air was always cold, smelling of wet wool and iron filings. Silas was a man carved from the same stone as the cliffs. He wore robes of gray linen that hung loosely on a frame that seemed too frail for the weight of the world he carried. He was the keeper of the lineage, the last of a bloodline that had traded their souls for longevity and power. He had 2 children, Thal and Nera. Thal was the elder, possessing a sharpness of mind and a cruelty of will that matched her father's. Nera was the younger, softer in presence, favored by the land itself, possessing a skin that burned with a pale, unnatural light. Silas sat at the high table, his hands trembling. On the table lay a sealed casket of lead and iron, heavy and cold. Within the metal casket rested a single seed. It was a bulbous, pulsating mass of tissue that had never touched a garden bed. It was a wound in the fabric of the world, a living thing that thrived only in the dark, feeding on the tension between people. "You are the elder," Silas said, his voice a dry rustle. "You are the keeper of the iron line. You must accept the charge." He gestured to the casket. "You are the older," Thal replied, her eyes narrow slits of ice. "You know the weight of the iron, but Nera, she has the softness. She is the one to carry the burden." "Nera is the soil," Silas corrected gently. "Thal, you are the blade, but the seed is neither." Nera sat in the corner, her head bowed, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. She did not speak. She was not jealous. She was simply aware of the distance that separated her from the world's violence. Silas placed the seed into Thal's lap. It was cold enough to burn the fingers that touched it. "Take it to the market," Silas commanded. "Take it to the edge of the world where the salt tides crash. You must feed it the iron of the world, but remember the warning, do not let the seed see the face of the younger. If the seed blooms, it takes what is offered to it." Thal took the lead box. It felt heavy, dense, and sickening. She nodded, a curt gesture. She stood, leaving the warm, stagnant air of the house, and stepped out into the storm. The journey to the salt market was a trial of descent. The market sat just below the house, a cluster of rotted piers and timber hovels clinging to the base of the iron cliffs where the salt water met the slate. This was the village of the dispossessed, a place where the world's rot pooled at the feet of her father's solitary estate. The roads were cracked with salt crust, and the wind carried the cries of gulls that had long since forgotten the sound of human voices. The sky was bruised purple, bruising the clouds that hovered like the ribcage of a leviathan. Thal walked with a staff of bone, the seed wrapped in oilcloth inside a leather pouch. She moved with purpose, but her mind was already fractured by the weight of the object. The seed hummed. It vibrated against her hip with a frequency that rattled the teeth in her skull. It was a hunger, not for food, but for the animus. It needed a spiritual anchor to sustain its growth. As she crossed the threshold of the lower marshland, the ground turned to mud. The air grew thick with spores that hissed when the wind blew. Thal saw the other vessels. Men and women stood in the mud of the lower village, their skin covered in patterns of red ink that pulsed in time with the seed's hum. They were the keepers before her. They were gone. Their faces were gone. Only the seed remained in them. She reached the edge of the low pier. This was the place where the salt water met the iron cliff. The market was there. It was a place of trade, but not in goods, in pieces, in moments, in the very essence of the spirit. Thal stood at the railing. She looked back toward the heights. Through the dark mist, looming directly above the market square on the ridge of the cliff, she saw the silhouette of her father's solitary house. A single window glowed with a warm, steady light. She saw Nera's window. She had never seen it so clearly before, so close yet unreachable. Nera was not just a sister, she was the sun to Thal's moon. She was the innocence that had been allowed to grow while Thal hardened. The seed in her pouch grew warm. It pressed against her thigh. It knew the location of the sun. It knew the value of the light it could consume. She walked to the market square. It was crowded with objects. Pots of salt, sacks of iron nails, jars of eyes, and vials of blood. Thal sought a buyer for the seed. She did not know why she brought it. Silas had told her to take it to the market, but he had not told her what to do with it. She had not been allowed to plant it. She had not been allowed to destroy it. She stood in the center of the square, the crowd parting as if it were a sea of rot. A man approached her. He wore a mask of porcelain, cracked down the center. He held a lantern that burned with a green flame. "I trade for iron," Thal said. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "I trade in the resonance of souls," the man said. "The seed is a parasite of the spirit. It is a siphon for the animus. You must feed it. I have no iron. You have the elder's jealousy. That is the nutrient. That is the spark it craves." The seed surged. Thal gasped. The pouch tightened around her skin. She could feel roots beginning to weave through the leather and into her own nerves, mapping her pathways. It was asking for her life force. She looked up at the cliff. She saw the light of Nara's window burning through the fog. Nara would be asleep by now, dreaming of the garden Silas could never enter. If she gave the seed to the world, it would grow and consume the light. If she destroyed the seed, the line would break. Silas had said the line was iron. If the iron broke, the house fell. "I will take it back," Thal said. "I will return to the house." The man smiled. "The iron house has no return." The man vanished into the crowd of salt-wet figures. The light of the house faded from the sky as the seed's hum grew louder. Thal looked at her own hand. A vein had darkened, turning purple and black. The skin beneath it pulsed like a second heartbeat. She could feel the seed migrating, crawling beneath her skin, dragging its weight up her leg toward her core. It was a voice that was not hers. It whispered that the seed was a flower. It whispered that Nara was the bud and Thal was the thorn that protected it. "I am the elder," Thal said to the empty air. "I will guard the seed, but I will not feed it." She turned to run back up the cliff path. The ground beneath her feet turned to black sludge. The iron gate above was gone. The house itself began to groan. Only the seed remained, sinking its roots deeper into her chest. She reached the summit. The solitary house stood in the mud like a skeleton. She could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, sounding like laughter. The seed in her chest grew. It was a living organ. It was a heart. It wanted a mother. It wanted a father. It wanted a body. Thal reached the door. The window of Nara's room was dark. Nara was not there. She had come to the threshold. Thal knew that the seed would find her. The seed could not die. It needed Nara's light. Thal stood before the window. The glass was frosted over with salt and ice. She reached out a hand to touch it. The glass was cold. The seed beneath her ribs burned with a heat that melted the ice on the glass. The door opened before she knocked. Nara stepped out. She was not sleeping. She was waiting. "You brought it," Nara said. Her voice was calm, as if speaking to a pet. Thal clutched her chest, her fingers digging into the fabric where the pulsating mass now sat anchored between her ribs. "You cannot reach it." "I know," Nara replied. She held up her own hand. Her palm was covered in mirroring veins of black ink, a sympathetic resonance. The seed was in Thal while claiming Nara's animus as its fuel. Thal stepped back. "It feeds on life." "It feeds on the spirit," Nara said. "It feeds on the knowledge that one is older than the other. The seed knows the hierarchy." Thal looked down. She saw the world differently. She saw the iron house not as shelter but as a cage. She saw the market below not as trade but as a slaughterhouse. She saw the light in her own chest, the terrible blooming heat of the seed as the only thing that mattered. "I will plant it," Thal said. "I will grow it." "You cannot plant a heart," Nara said. "You must become it." The seed surged within Thal's torso. It was no longer just inside her. It was overwriting her. Her ribs cracked outward like opening petals. Her skin tightened over new muscle that pulsed with black, oily fluid. She was becoming the vessel for the thing Silas had warned her about. Desperate to end the transformation, Thal reached into the ruin of her own chest, her fingers closing around the pulsating mass of crimson flesh. She tried to tear it out. to destroy it, but as her fingers touched the core, the hunger overwhelmed her. She did not cast it away. She felt a sickening compulsion. She pressed the seed toward her throat, the flesh of the object merging with her own jaw. She did not consume it so much as she absorbed it, pulling the entirety of the blight into her soul. The house collapsed. The cliff crumbled. The sea rushed in to fill the void. Nara stood alone, holding the empty lead casket Thal had discarded. The seed was gone from the world of objects. Thal stood in the center of the ruin. Her head touched the smoke of the burning wreckage. Her eyes were no longer eyes. They were two voids that looked back from a face of knotted roots and iron-hard sinew. She was the iron house. She was the seed. She was the bloom. Nara looked at her. She felt the pull of the world. The world was hungry. The seed had won. It had grown. Thal spoke, but her voice was the sound of the wind in the cypress trees vibrating from a chest that was now a hollow, glowing kiln. "I am the flower," she said. Nara stepped away from the ruin. The door was open to the sea. She walked into the dark. The world behind her was burning. The world in front of her was silent. The house fell into the water. The cliff crumbled. The iron gate rusted into powder. The world remained. The seed remained nested forever in the titan that had been her sister. The bloom had bloomed. Thal was the new sky. She was the new land. She was the new law. And the seed fed on Nara's light from across the distance. It fed on the jealousy that had never died. It fed on the spiritual hunger that Silas had never filled. The spirit became the monster. The iron was consumed. The blood was drawn. The flower was the flesh. Silence. Only the pulse. Only the seed. The bloom had bloomed.